Ahoy, mateys! Welcome to Podcasts of the Caribbean, a podcast covering the world of Pirates of the Caribbean, from the theme parks to the movies and everything in between. My name is Justin Helmer, and I will be your host on this voyage through the Caribbean. It'd be too late to alter course now, mateys. Welcome back to Podcasts of the Caribbean. The time has arrived. We are on episode 14, and this is the episode that we'll be covering the Maelstrom. Our final At World's End episode. I am so excited for this episode. I hope you guys are excited too, because the Maelstrom is one of my favorite scenes in any movie ever. I mean, no action sequence has outdone the Maelstrom in the almost 16 years that it's been out. It's unbeatable. It's seriously unbeatable. And then, of course, after the Maelstrom, we have the rest and the ending of the movie to cover. So this is going to be a really awesome episode. It's going to be probably a longer one, probably one of the longer episodes I've done. But I cannot wait to get into the movie. Right before we do, though, this is going to be the Season 1 finale of Podcasts of the Caribbean. So after this episode, we'll be taking a week or so break. I'll keep you updated on the social media accounts for the podcast on Twitter and Instagram. Make sure you follow them. I also post content and trivia and videos over there as well. But I will be updating you guys when the podcast will be coming back for Season 2, which will probably be maybe 2-3 weeks. So without further ado, let's get into Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End and dive headfirst into the Maelstrom. So we left off last week right after the pirates hoisted the colors, and all the pirates are getting energized for this big fight to come. And right after they hoist the colors, all the flags go up. We go over to Cutler Beckett, who of course is having tea, as he always does. But even in this shot, when Beckett's sipping his tea, you can see the wind is really picking up. The sky has become really cloudy. Something is going to happen. Definitely bad weather is on the horizon. But not just bad weather, worse than bad weather. So Beckett's sipping his tea, and Groves comes over to Beckett, and he says, "We have a favorable wind, sir." And then Beckett looks up at the sky and says, "Oh, so we do. Signal Jones to give no quarter. That should brighten his day." And then we have this guy on the Endeavour who is waving and signaling the Dutchman to move forward. And the Dutchman is the first of the Armada to move toward the pirates. And Ian Mercer sees the signal, and he screams, "To arms! We give no quarter!" And the whole crew begins to shout and get energized, and Davy Jones looks up at the sky, and he senses it. He puts his hand over his heart, and he just says, "Calypso." After he says Calypso, we get the first thunder and lightning coming down, and you can start to see the clouds in the sky are beginning to swirl. So obviously, weather's getting bad, and then it begins to rain. And Davy Jones closes his eyes, and as the rain begins to pour even harder, he just starts screaming. And then the Dutchman begins to move forward into the ocean with the Black Pearl that begins to move forward as well. So now we have our two ships that'll be fighting in this battle. And so, of course, on the Black Pearl now, it's raining. The wind is picking up. It's crazy. So Pintel and Rigetti are on deck, and they're walking down, and then Pintel says, "Have you noticed, on top of everything, it's raining?" And Rigetti says, "That's a bad sign." And then Gibbs comes in. He says, "Man the capstan, raise the main top yard, keep that powder dry." And then the lightning begins to come out of the sky and hit right down in the middle of the ocean, in between the Black Pearl and the Flying Dutchman. And you can see that the water begins to shoot up, and it begins to swirl downward. And we get to see, when Gibbs looks over the railing, what does he see? he sees Maelstrom, and he screams it. And Elizabeth and Will, they see it, and they turn to Barbossa, and Elizabeth says, "Captain Barbossa, we need you at the helm." And Barbossa looks at her, and he just says, "Aye, that be true." And he pulls Cotton off the wheel, and he says, "Brace up yards, ya cack-handed deck apes. Dying is the day worth living for." And, of course, you can see Elizabeth smiling after Barbossa takes the helm, because Barbossa is going to be the one. He's the only one that can steer this ship through this maelstrom. And we get that great shot of the Black Pearl and the Flying Dutchman, and the camera moves upward, and we see the gigantic whirlpool in the middle of the ocean. And Mercer, of course, is scared, and he tells Davy Jones to veer off. But Davy Jones says, "She'll not harm us. Full boring into the abyss." And then Mercer asks him, he's like, "Are you mad?" And then Davy Jones is like, "Ha! You afraid to get wet?" And of course, as we have this beginning of the Maelstrom here, it's hard to not bring up the absolutely fantastic music that Hans Zimmer has in this battle scene. I mean, the music in this scene does not stop. It just keeps going and going and going. Like, it doesn't, like, slow down. The music just gets better and better and better and better as this scene goes on. It's absolutely incredible. Add that in with the fantastic CGI and the fantastic special effects. Add that in with the absolute fantastic ship battle that we're about to have between the Dutchman and the Pearl. And then also how a lot of the scene was shot practically. So I'll bring that up since we're getting right into the Maelstrom here. They shot a lot of the practical stuff for the Maelstrom in a gigantic airplane hangar in Palmdale. And it was ginormous. Like, I'm telling, this hangar was absolutely huge. Like, some people in the behind the scenes, they said if you're standing on one end, you couldn't see the other end because it was so long at the other end. You couldn't see the other end of the hangar. So this hangar was absolutely huge. And this is where they did a lot of the scenes. They filmed the Calypso crab scene in this hangar too. They did Up is Down with the ship teetering. And they also did the Maelstrom, of course. And they built these replicas of the ships, specifically the Pearl and the Dutchman. And they put them together, side to side, so it would look like they're in battle. So they had to construct these two new versions of the ships. They didn't just take the ships from the water and put them in here. They had to construct two new ships, identical replicas of the deck. And then they had them on these ginormous gimbals. Some of the biggest gimbals that have ever been used for a movie. And these gimbals would be on either end of each ship, and that when those gimbals were moving, it would simulate the rocking and moving of each ship. So when you have those gimbals moving on both ships, you really get the rocking of the sea, the movement of the ship, and it really gives that really realistic effect to both of these ships. And of course, while those gimbals are moving, you also have the rain coming on. So they installed in this hangar literally like dozens and dozens and dozens of like rain systems. And when turned on, they would just pelt down. And it wasn't like it would start sprinkling and then get like more of a downpour. No. Turn on, immediately downpour. You would immediately get completely soaked. And there's a lot of great behind the scenes content for the Maelstrom. So if you're really interested in it, if you go on YouTube and search it, you can find a lot of this awesome stuff. Like a lot of people, Kevin McNally in one of the featurettes, he said, "Oh, how wet can a man be? How wet and cold can you be?" And Bill Nye also said that they shot this for 10 weeks in the rain in this Maelstrom. Like that's how long it took to shoot this scene. It took like literally 10 weeks of shooting. Can you imagine each day you come to work, you get drenched for like 8 hours for 10 weeks straight? I mean, it's crazy. And it's absolutely incredible. And then of course you had the wind going on as well. So you had the wind and the rain, actually practical. And then you also had lights as well. So they had a huge lighting system, and that lighting can simulate the thunder and lightning and everything as well. So you had the lights, the rain, the wind to simulate the actual storm. You have the ships rocking on the gimbals, and then you have stunt guys who are literally swinging from ship to ship, and you have people on deck actually fighting. So it's one of the craziest things that has ever been shot. I mean, nothing has been on this scale since this movie. And this reinforces the fact that these two movies, Dead Man's Chest and At World's End, were literally the end of an era. Like, no one has done stuff like this anymore. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. So that's a little bit of how they shot this scene. Of course, I'll bring it back later when we get to some other stuff. But this scene was absolutely crazy. And if you want to see behind the scenes stuff of how they shot it, there's a wealth. I mean, like, there's so much stuff about this scene, how they filmed it. So if you're really interested, it's all on YouTube as well, and I can link to it if you want. But it's absolutely so awesome to actually watch them film this. It's crazy. So the Flying Dutchman and the Pearl begin to move into the whirlpool, and Will sees the Dutchman and he says, "She's on our stern and gaining." And then Barbossa yells, "More speed! Haul your wind and hold your water!" And as you can see, both ships are now in the whirlpool and they're tilting. So we're really about to get to the battle. It's going to start in a few minutes. And Davy Jones orders his men to run out the bow cannons. So the triple guns return in At World's End, and he fires them off, and they hit on the Black Pearl. They hit on the back of the ship, and then one cannonball hits the front of the ship and sends a guy off. I love that. And Will goes over to Barbossa and he says, "Take us out, or they'll overbear us." And then Barbossa just says, "Nay, further in. We'll cut across to faster waters." And then Elizabeth just yells to the crew, "Prepare to broadside." And then the music is kicking in at this point. I mean, it's going absolutely insane. And this is when Gibbs begins to order the gunners, and he says, "Captain the guns, bear a hand." And then Will says, "Master your courage, men, at the ready." And you can see everyone on the crew is beginning to load the cannons. Everyone's getting into their spots. I love how some pirates are hoisting Marty up to the crow's nest with a barrel full of guns. Then we go over to the brig on the Flying Dutchman, where, of course, Jack is still in the brig. And I love this scene because he's trying to figure out how to get out of the brig. And what does he do? He thinks like Will. So he keeps repeating to himself, "Think like Will, think like Will, think like Will." And then the other Jacks are also saying, "Half brow hinges, half brow hinges, half brow hinges." And then finally it comes to him, and then Jack just says, "Think like Will, half brow hinges, leverage." And then, of course, he uses a piece of wood to spring the door open, just like Will did in the first movie. So I love that payoff of the leverage. It's so cool. And also, earlier in this movie, when Will and Jack were talking, and Will said, "I said to myself, think like Jack." And then in here, at this scene, Jack is trying to think like Will. So it just further reinforces the fact that, they're very similar characters, and Will is kind of taking after Jack more. But I love how Jack uses the leverage to free himself from the brig. Great payoff to the leverage arc of these three movies. And he blows the door off the brig, and he begins to run away, and he says, "Wish us luck, boys, we'll need it." And then Jack Sparrow 2 and 3, they just say, "I miss him already. He is quite charming, isn't he?" And then Dutchman Jack Sparrow in the back, he says, "Nobody move. I dropped me brain." And then Jack Sparrow 2 and 3 just look at each other. We're about to get one of the best minutes of film. I mean, like, what we're about to see, the camera movement we're about to see, and also just the absolute amazingness of this scene we're about to see. So we get this great scene of the Black Pearl kicking up waves, and then we go onto the deck, and Gibbs begins to yell again, "Batten down the hatches!" And he goes below deck to the gunners, and he says, "Step to your guns! Midship cannoneers, sight the masts!" And of course, all of the cannon ports are pulled up, and the guns are rolled out, and we have this absolutely banger score in the background that's synced up with the cannons coming out of the gun ports. It's so good. I mean, it's so amazing. The adrenaline just starts to rush in this scene. Like you just get so excited. The music, and then everyone. It's so good. I don't know how they pulled off a scene this well. Then we go over to the Dutchman, and Mercer yells, "Main battery at the ready!" And then the Dutchman crew, of course, begins to run out their guns. And now that both ships have their guns out, we get this great shot of Pintel and Righetti at their cannon, looking through the gun port. Or I should say gun port, but it's like a complete... There is no gun port. It's just it's destroyed, which I find so funny. Because if you remember in Dead Man's Chest, when the Kraken attacked the Black Pearl, one of the Kraken's tentacles went through Pintel and Righetti's gunport station. So I'm guessing if they're at the same cannon, because that tentacle went through there, it broke the gunport. So I do like that little continuity there. But I love how you can see through the gunport, and you can see the Flying Dutchman in the distance. It's so good. But Gibbs tells everyone to hold, and he says, "Hold there, wait till we're board to board." And then we finally get, as they near each other, Barbossa just yells, "Fire!" And then Elizabeth yells, "Fire!" Gibbs says, "Fire! Fire all!" And the cannons begin to shoot off. Davy Jones yells to fire. The Flying Dutchman fires their guns. And then Will yells fire. And then all the guns are going off now. The battle has commenced. And we finally get this absolutely glorious camera shot that moves across the Black Pearl. And it tracks the entire Black Pearl, the explosions going off, the people running on deck. It's absolutely crazy. And we go up to Barbossa, and he says, "It be too late to alter course now, mateys." But oh my God, it's such a good scene. And if you watch some behind the scenes stuff, they actually have a video of them shooting this scene. So they had the camera, and then they ran the camera along this track to get that movement. But it's such a good tracking shot along the Pearl with the explosions going off, the cannons going off, the stunt guys jumping on the deck, and it's so good. It never fails to just... I mean, it's been almost 16 years, and this is literally one of the coolest things in any movie it's ever been made. It's so amazing. So after that fantastic scene, we go over to the Flying Dutchman again, where Jack Sparrow goes into the captain's cabin, and he is cornered by Murtaugh and Mulroy, who aim their little miniature cannons at Jack. And I love how Mulroy is like, "Hold there or we'll shoot." And then right after he says that, a cannonball goes right through the captain's cabin behind them, and then Jack's just like, "Good one." And I love he walks over to the side of the room, and I love how Murtaugh and Mulroy just keep tracking him with their cannons, and Jack says, "I just come to get me effect." And then he looks at them again, and he's like, "Admiral though it may be, why are you here when you could be elsewhere?" And then Murtaugh just says, "Someone has to stay and guard the chest." And then I love how Mulroy turns and faces Murtaugh, and he's like, "There's no question. There has been a breakdown in military discipline on board this vessel." And then Murtaugh's like, "I blame the fish people." And then Mulroy's like, "Oh, the fish people. By dint of being fish people are automatically not as disciplined as non-fish people." And then Murtaugh's like, "It seems contributory is all I'm suggesting." And then Mulroy's like, "Well, it is true. If there were no fish people, there'd be no need to guard the chest." And then Murtaugh just says, and if there were no chest, we wouldn't need to be here to guard it. And then I love how after they stop talking and notice the chest is gone because Jack took it while they were arguing with each other. And it's so good. I love that Murtaugh and Mulroy really get this scene to just shine. It's so funny. I love these two guys. Oh my god. I love how Jack just takes the chest from them and they just don't even notice. But we go back out into the Maelstrom once again. And a cannonball is coming right toward the Dutchman. And Mercer yells, "Prepare to board!" And that cannonball is coming right for the Dutchman. And Davy Jones shouts, "Cover!" And he pulls Mercer out of the way right before the cannonball hits right where they were standing. So Davy Jones and Mercer stand back up, and they notice that all of the East India Trading Company guys that were standing up there with them have been badly injured. And now that they're all down, Davy Jones takes this opportunity to do what he wanted to do a while ago. And he grabs Mercer and holds him in place. And he uses his tentacles to... I don't even... It's horrifying. He strangles Mercer with some of his tentacles. Some of the tentacles go into Mercer's nose, into his eyes, and the one tentacle goes in his mouth and comes out his nose. It's absolutely gross. It's oh my god. I don't know what this is called. He just kills him. I don't know what this is called, but he literally just... I mean, Mercer's dead. He's just dead, and yeah. So Davy Jones pulls all his tentacles away after doing whatever that was, and he pulls the key off of Mercer's neck, and Mercer just drops down to the deck, dead. So we finally say goodbye to Ian Mercer, and we go back below deck where Jack is coming out of the captain's cabin, and I love how he opens the door and looks around before he comes out. And then, what absolute fortune. Right as Jack begins to walk out of the captain's cabin, he is stopped right by Davy Jones. And Davy Jones laughs and he's like, "Ah, looky here, boys. A lost bird that never learned to fly." Yeah. And he pulls out his sword, which also happens to be the Sword of Destiny. Keep that in mind. It's going to be very important very soon. But Jack just says, "To my great regret." And he runs over to the railing, and he grabs onto that rope, and he says, "It's never too late to learn, mate." And he smashes the rope with the chest, and he begins to fly up right over and onto the mast of the Flying Dutchman. And he tries to balance himself on there, and this is just absolutely crazy. And he's like, "Oh." And he notices that Davy Jones just morphs right through the mast and is up there with him. And Davy Jones just says, "The chest, hand it over." And then Jack Sparrow draws his sword and he says, "I can set you free, mate." And Davy Jones just replies, "My freedom was forfeit long ago." And he yells and begins to fight with Jack. And we begin this absolutely awesome fight scene between Jack and Jones on the mast of the Flying Dutchman, in the middle of this Maelstrom. And I'll also mention, this was shot practically too. Like, they literally made a set. They made another Dutchman mast. And they had, of course, it wasn't... I mean, it was Johnny Depp a lot of the time, but of course they also had Johnny's stunt double up there. And Bill Nye did a little bit, but it was more so Bill Nye's stunt guy doing this scene. And a lot of the action in this scene is Bill Nye's stunt double. So some of it is Bill Nye, some of it is just his stunt double. If it's just the fighting, it's probably stunt double. If it's Jones talking, it's Bill Nye. But so they had this mast set, and it actually was above ground. And they had, the two guys harnessed up there. Sometimes it was Johnny, sometimes it was a stunt double. And they had them, harnessed on that mast, and they actually fought on the mast while get this, while the mast was spinning in a circle. I mean, it's the fact this stuff doesn't get done anymore. Like, you know, you could just do this whole thing CGI, but the fact that they actually did the practical part of this with them standing on the mast and fighting, and also while spinning sometimes, pretty crazy. But they also didn't just do it on the mast. They also just had one where they just stood on mats on the floor for the close-ups, so they didn't have to, you know, do it on the mast. But for the long shots and everything, those are the ones where they're actually on the mast fighting practically. But it's just so cool how so much of this scene was shot practically, even though if you look around, the whole entire shot is almost CGI because the water, the storm, and everything. But so much of it is also practical. It's this absolutely perfect marriage of practical effects and CGI that ends up creating this absolutely awesome action scene. It's so good. But Jones and Jack are fighting on the mast. Absolutely, I love it so much. And we go back over and we get this great shot of the Black Pearl and the Dutchman in the Maelstrom again. And we go over to the Flying Dutchman, where they begin to send over their first wave of boarders. So does the Black Pearl, and they swing on the ropes between the ships. Some of the pirates and some of the guys fall off into the Maelstrom below. Unfortunate, but the guys make it to either ship. I love how Will pulls out a pistol and shoots one of the guys off of the ropes. But we see a lot of Dutchman crewmen and East India Trading Company soldiers on the Black Pearl now, and now we finally get into the sword fighting and the actual hand-to-hand combat of this scene. So of course we have the cannons still going off on either ship, and now we have hand-to-hand combat on the deck. And I love how they don't even spare Barbossa. I mean, Barbossa's literally trying to steer the ship, and he's also being attacked by a Dutchman guy at the same time. Like, Barbossa's just a badass. I mean, he's so good. I love Barbossa so much. But now this leads us into my favorite. I don't put this lightly. This is my favorite scene in all of Pirates of the Caribbean. As you guys know, I am a huge Will and Elizabeth fan. I love Willabeth. I've loved Willabeth ever since my whole life. This is my favorite scene in all of Pirates of the Caribbean, and this is the wedding scene between Will and Elizabeth, and I just love this scene so much. The music, the action, the dialogue, it's so good. It's so good. And you know, Orlando Bloom and Keira Knightley actually, you know, they rehearsed this scene. Some of it is their stunt doubles doing, you know, Keira flips a guy over. That's not Keira. That's actually Lisa Hoyle, her stunt double. But like, it's oh my god. And then we have Barbossa in this as well. So let's just get into this scene. Oh my god, I love this scene so much. So Will calls over to Elizabeth, who is also fighting a guy. And I love how they both stab that one Dutchman guy at the same time, and they pull out. But Will says, "Elizabeth, will you marry me?" And then I love how Elizabeth is completely shocked, and they're interrupted by another Dutchman crew member. And Elizabeth just says, "I don't think now's the best time." And then Will just replies, "Now might be the only time." And I love how while they're talking, they're just absolutely owning these guys. Will is taking these guys out. Elizabeth is wreaking havoc as well. I mean, like, Will taught Elizabeth well, let me tell you. But Will just goes over to Elizabeth and he says, "I love you." Which, of course, he hasn't said "I love you" since the end of the first movie. So, I mean, like, it's so good. And they continue to fight, and I just... Man, I know the choreography of this scene by heart. Like, but Will grabs her arm and he says, "I've made my choice. What's yours?" And then I love how Elizabeth just calls out, "Barbossa!" And then you can see Will's face and he's like, "What?" It's so funny. And then right after, she just says, "Marry us," and then Will's like, "Oh, okay." I just like Will was like, "When was he ever an option?" And Barbossa turns around and he says, "I'm a little busy at the moment." And of course, Barbossa is still in the middle of fighting like 2 Dutchman crew members. And then Will and Elizabeth continue to go over and fight as well. And then Will just says, "Barbossa, now." And then he says, "Fine then." And I like how when we get that shot, we just see Barbossa using the jellyfish guy's sword to stab Maury and the other Dutchman crew member. Like, it's so great. And then he pulls it out again, and Elizabeth literally flips that East India Trading Company soldier, which was Lisa Hoyle, but it's, oh my god. And Barbossa smacks the jellyfish guy, and he begins to stand up on that little table in front of the wheel. He kicks a guy right in the face. He stands up and he says, "Dearly beloved, we be gathered here today." And then he's interrupted again, and he's fighting this guy as he's talking, and he says, "To nail your gizzards to the mast, you poxseeker." And he kicks that guy again. And Will and Elizabeth begin to fight again. They run to the other side of the mast, and then Will says, "Elizabeth Swan, do you take me to be your husband?" And then Elizabeth just says, "I do." And then Will's just, "Great." And then they jump over to the other side of the deck, and then Elizabeth just says, "Will Turner, do you take me to be your wife?" And I love how they're fighting in the middle of this. They're holding hands, and then they switch sides, and they fight again. And I love how Will stabs that guy. Elizabeth blocks the one guy, and then Will stabs him. And then Elizabeth says, "In sickness and in health, with health being the less likely." And I love how Barbossa stabs under his legs and stabs the East India Trading Company guy behind him under his legs. It's so great. And then I love how Will does that big sword flip around the 360, and he just says, "I do." And they both duck, and then we see Barbossa again, and he's literally fighting 2 guys at the same time, and he says, "As captain, I now pronounce you." And we have one of my favorite moves is Will pulls Elizabeth onto his shoulder, and they both stab the 2 guys behind and in front of them. I just love how he pulls her onto his shoulder and they stab. It's great. It's great. And then Barbossa says, "You may kiss," and he pulls out his flintlock and he shoots the one East India Trading Company guy as he laughs. I love Barbossa, man. And Will and Elizabeth get ready to kiss, but are interrupted by another East India Trading Company guy. Absolutely rude, dude. Do you not notice that these 2 people are getting married right now? But Barbossa jumps down, he kicks that one guy, and he says, "You may kiss." And then Will and Elizabeth cross blades, and I love how Barbossa flings his sword onto 2 people and kills them both. And he says, "Just kiss." And we finally get the Will Turner and Elizabeth kiss, and they are now married, and we have this great slow-mo 360 shot of their kiss. With the absolutely gorgeous music by Hans Zimmer playing in the background. And I love how we see Pintel and Rigetti coming up from below deck with Jack the Monkey. And they see Will and Elizabeth kissing. And we have this great shot of the water coming on deck, and it's all slow motion. And then we just see Pintel and Rigetti, they're just smiling. And it's so great. And then they're interrupted by Jack the Monkey, which I love. And then we go back up to Marty, who is in the crow's nest, and with his his barrel of guns, he's up there shooting people off the ropes, which is great. He's literally shooting people off the Dutchman. He's shooting people off the ropes, which is absolutely great. I love how he's tied to the mast as well, so he can't fall off. We go back over to the Dutchman. And so if you notice here, Murtaugh and Mulroy come out, as you notice. But on the right side of the screen, you can see that Dutchman crew member, he runs that one pirate into the wall and starts smacking him. And he literally keeps smacking him this whole shot. So Murtaugh and Mulroy come out and they're doing their thing, and then Murtaugh says, "Leave it," and then Mulroy throws the cannon down. And that whole entire time that scene takes place, that one pirate is still getting pummeled by that Dutchman crew guy. Like, it's so crazy. Like, that guy's getting pummeled for literally like 15 seconds straight. We go back up to the mast of the Flying Dutchman, where Davy Jones and Jack Sparrow are still fighting. And we have this great shot where they get close to each other, and Davy Jones just says, "You can do nothing without the key." And then Jack just says, "I already have the key." And then Davy Jones just smiles and says, "No, you don't." And he pulls out the key with his tentacle. And then Jack just says, "Oh, that key." And I love this move. Jack breaks the block by Davy Jones, and he starts swirling his arm, and then he just cuts off Davy Jones's front tentacle, holding the key. I just love that move, how Jack just swings his sword, cuts off that main tentacle, and then he uses the chest to knock the sword out of Davy Jones's hand, and then he smacks Davy Jones in the face with the chest and tries to hit him with his sword, but Davy Jones grabs his sword with the crab claw and breaks Jack Sparrow's sword. So that's great. And Davy Jones begins to walk toward Jack, who is nearing the end of the mast. And we're getting farther and farther into the Maelstrom here, so the ships are getting lower and lower and lower, which means they're getting closer and closer together. So what's going to happen when they get closer and closer together? Well, they're going to literally smack into each other. So real quick, we have Barbossa fighting Maury. And I love how Maury's literally about to eat Barbossa, but Barbossa cuts off Maury's head. And Cotton grabs the wheel because they're literally starting to plummet into the center here. But, of course, Cotton can't help the fact that the ships are going to smack into each other. The tops of the main mast of the Black Pearl and the Flying Dutchman smack together and interlock, and now both ships, I love it, everyone on the ropes just flies off, and I guess they all died. But Jack also falls off the mast of the Dutchman, and Davy Jones saves him because Davy Jones grabbed the chest that Jack is also holding on to. But now both ships, of course, are literally like forming a triangle in the Maelstrom because they're both stuck together by the top of their masts. And I love how we have this shot of Will on deck of the Black Pearl, and he looks over to the Flying Dutchman and sees Jack dangling from the chest and being held by Davy Jones. And I just love Davy Jones pulls up the chest and he sees Jack, and Jack just smiles at him, and then Davy Jones just throws Jack over, literally like completely flings him over. But luckily Jack grabs onto a rope, and this rope is also being held onto by Clanker, and this is the unfortunate end of Clanker as well. But Jack notices that Clanker has his pistol, and Jack just grabs it off of Clanker and he says, "Oi, my pistol," and he smacks Clanker in the head, and Clanker falls off into the abyss below. Rip Clanker. But Jack aims his pistol at Jones, who is standing triumphantly with the chest, and he shoots the chest right out of Jones's hand. And the chest, as it falls, it smacks right into Hadris's head, and it literally pushes Hadris's head into his body, and Hadris stumbles off the Flying Dutchman, and Hadris is also lost to the abyss. But while Hadris falls off the ship, Will Turner has just flung himself over to the Flying Dutchman, and he sees the chest is literally right in front of him. So Will grabs the chest and begins to run through the deck. He almost gets hit by a cannonball, but he's stopped by Macus, who was blocking his way. And Macus just turns and sees him, and he just says, "Turner!" And he tries to hit Will with his axe. I love how Will blocks with the chest. And we go back over to the Black Pearl, where Pintel and Rigetti have loaded Jack the Monkey into the cannon. And once Gibbs yells fire, they shoot the cannon, and Jack the Monkey goes hurtling over to the Flying Dutchman. And what fortune! Jack the Monkey sticks right onto Macus's face, pushing Macus off of the deck. And I love how Will just says, "Thank you, Jack." And then I love how this East India Trading Company guy picks up the Sword of Destiny from the ground, and then Davy Jones just jumps down from the mast and just boom, just comes down on the deck. And I love how he walks over to that guy, and he doesn't just take it from him. Davy Jones literally stabs the guy holding it and then pulls it out. Like, so unnecessary. But as Will is running with the chest, he is smacked and sent to the ground by his father, who now has pretty much completely forgotten who he is. But I love how he gets this awesome shot of Davy Jones moving through the deck. He's literally pulling his own crew members aside. He's pushing people aside to get to the chest. And then we go back up to Jack, who is still on that rope. He's about to hit another guy on another rope. So what does Jack do? He kicks the other guy off of his rope and takes that guy's rope. And then, of course, there's two more guys on other ropes coming for Jack as well. Then we go back down to Will, who is now fighting his father. And Will, is telling Bootstrap, "Stop, it's me." And he just says, "It's Will, your son." And then Bootstrap stops for a second, but he just flings Will to the side and tries to stab Will. Will ducks out of the way. But it's also really cool in this scene. You can see, more so since Bootstrap is now out of the ship, that if you look at Bootstrap when we first see him in Dead Man's Chest, and you see what he looks like now, you can see that the oceanic growth and everything has really started to happen. Like the starfish on his face in Dead Man's Chest, you can see how it starts to grow and start to actually like become part of his face. And then the coral and the kind of the reefs and everything really start to kind of spike up and everything. It's really cool to see the growth happen on Bootstrap throughout these two movies if you pay attention to it. But Jack is being chased by two guys on ropes, one behind him and one in front of him. So Jack just flings downward, and these two guys get stuck on their ropes and smack into each other. And Davy Jones finally reaches the chest, but not before Jack flings off the rope right in front of Davy Jones, in between him and the chest. I also love, while Davy Jones is walking toward the chest, there's a Dutchman crew member right behind him that gets literally sent right off the ship because he gets hit by a cannonball. It's great. There's so much stuff happening in the background of this scene that you really, if you just pay attention to the background, you'll see stuff that you've probably never seen before. But Jack pulls out his sword, and he realizes that Jones broke his sword. So Jack just starts to run away, and I love how they end up on either side of the capstan, and they're just like, I love this scene so much. And Jones just morphs through the capstan, and Jack just begins to spin it. And then I love how Davy Jones just spins around, and he stops right in front of Jack and just screams at him, and then Jack screams back and runs away again. It's so great. But of course, while we have Jack and Jones fighting, I guess, Will and Bootstrap are also fighting. And Murtagh and Mulroy take this chance to swing over to the Black Pearl. And they literally smack right into the side of the ship. And Elizabeth grabs onto their rope, ready to go over to the Dutchman. And then we have this great shot of Gibbs, Pintel, and Rigetti, and they are getting ready to free themselves from the mast above, since the two ships are stuck together. You can see how Pintel is literally pulling a cannon and kind of pointing it straight up. Righetti's pulling those ropes to help him. Marty's coming back down from the crow's nest. And then Gibbs is also helping with the rope. And then Gibbs just tells Elizabeth to go. Then we go back over to the Dutchman, where Jack is still fighting Davy Jones. And he pulls out one of the spokes from the capstan and starts fighting Jones with that. But as Jack is fighting Jones here, Jones grabs the spoke and just smacks Jack and sends him down. And right after that, Elizabeth swings over to the Dutchman right in front of Jones, once again blocking Jones from the chest. And then Davy Jones just says, "Haradana, you'll see no mercy from me, ya." And then Elizabeth just says, "That's why I brought this." And she pulls out her sword, and Jones and Elizabeth begin to fight. And I love how Jack, on the ground, he sees the tentacle with the key sliding across the deck. And Jack now has everything he needs. He has the key, and he knows where the chest is, and he's ready to stab the heart. So this is Jack's moment to finally get what he has wanted to get for these past 2 movies. And Elizabeth is fighting Jones. She begins to be overwhelmed, but Will disarms his dad, and he notices that Davy Jones has just struck Elizabeth, and she has pretty much just been knocked out onto the deck. And Will just pulls out his father's knife, and he says, "I'm not going to kill you. I made you a promise." And he stabs the knife into the railing, and then Davy Jones begins to prepare to kill Elizabeth, but before he can, he's stabbed by Will. Davy Jones just says, "Mister, did you forget? I'm a heartless wretch." And he bends the sword so Will can't yank it out. And then Davy Jones flips around and he smacks Will in the head with his crab leg. And now Will and Elizabeth are separated by Jones in between them, and they look at each other. And Davy Jones looks between them as well. And then he just smiles and says, "Ah, love, a dreadful bond." And he turns back to Will and he says, "And yet, so easily severed. Tell me, William Turner, do you fear death?" And right after he says that, Davy Jones just hears, "Do you?" And he turns around and he sees Jack Sparrow with the heart in his hand, ready to stab it. So Jack, of course, has opened the chest with the key, and he has the heart in his hands, prepared to stab it, killing Jones and making him the new captain of the Flying Dutchman. So Will sees this and he begins to smile. Elizabeth looks over at him as well. And Jack just says, "Heady tonic, holding life and death in the palm of one's hand." And then Jones just says, "You're a cruel man, Jack Sparrow." And then Jack just says, "Cruel is a matter of perspective." And then Jones just says, "Is it?" And in a turn of events, Davy Jones stabs Will with the sword that Will Turner made in the first movie. A lot of people don't pick up on that. But that is the same sword Will made for Norrington's promotion in Curse of the Black Pearl. It has made its way through these 3 movies, and now Davy Jones has just used that sword to kill Will Turner. So Will Turner made the sword that would end up killing him. It's one of my favorite details in these movies is that sword, the Sword of Destiny, as I call it. But more importantly, Will has just been stabbed. And, oh man, if 5-year-old me seeing this movie for the first time, when Will got stabbed, I began to cry. I'm not joking. I literally began to cry when I saw this movie for the first time as a kid. Of course, Will Turner is my favorite character. He's always been my favorite character ever since I was a kid. And when Will got stabbed, I literally started bawling my eyes out. It was bad. It was bad. But Jack sees Will get stabbed, and Jack hesitates. And everything that was just going through Jack's mind, he was going to stab the heart, he was going to become the new captain, live forever. It's all completely gone when he sees Will get stabbed. And this is the moment that forges and completes Jack Sparrow's arc in these first 3 movies. This is the moment where instead of choosing himself, he's going to save someone else instead of himself, which is literally like one of the biggest points in his arc in these first 3 films. But once Will is stabbed, Davy Jones, of course, grinds the sword through Will's heart. Elizabeth not doing well. But those groans from Will are ingrained in my memory. But Davy Jones releases the sword, and Jack just looks up in horror at Davy Jones, and Jones just starts laughing. And Jack looks down at the heart again, and he's like, what am I going to do? And then he looks back at Will, and he's like, I have the choice to either have myself live forever or save my friend. And this is the moment that Jack decides. And Elizabeth goes over to Will, and Keira Knightley's performance in this scene alone should have gotten her an Oscar nomination. I mean, Keira Knightley's performance in any of these 3 movies should have gotten her an Oscar nomination, but this movie alone she should have gotten an Oscar for. But she goes over to Will, and, she starts saying, look at me, stay with me, you're all right. And then Bootstrap finally notices, and he says, William, my son. And then he springs up and jumps on to Davy Jones and grabs Jones. And Jack, we see this great shot of Jack, who he's trying to decide, should he stab the heart or should he help Will? It's just this great moment of like, what is Jack going to do? Is he going to save someone else for the first time in his life? And we see, of course, Bootstrap is, really beating up Davy Jones, and Jack just looks up at Will again. And of course, at this point, Will is, literally about to die. Elizabeth, still saying, Will, look at me, look at me. And Davy Jones pulls out the sword from his back, and is about to stab Bootstrap. And Davy Jones just says, you will not forestall my judgment. And he begins to stab Bootstrap, but before he can, Will uses Jack Sparrow's sword to stab the heart of Davy Jones. And we get the reveal that Jack Sparrow helped Will stab the heart. And Davy Jones sees this, and he begins to twitch and everything, and he just gasps, and he just says, Calypso. And then he falls right overboard into the abyss of the Maelstrom, and Davy Jones has now died. And we go back over to Barbossa, who is yelling as she's taking us down, make quick or Salaka for us all. And of course, Ragetti loads a chain shot into that cannon that Pinto and Ragetti were aiming up. Murtagh and Mulroy have finally climbed onto the Pearl. Gibbs fires the chain shot. It breaks the ships apart. Barbossa's finally able to steer the Black Pearl away. And the Black Pearl begins to leave the Maelstrom, with the Flying Dutchman beginning to sink down. And Bootstrap grabs the knife from the railing and looks back at his son. And at this point, Will is, about to die, and Will finally takes his last breath. And Elizabeth just begins to freak out, and she said, no, and I can't like, I've like recited all this dialogue, but I just can't for this part. Because, like, it's so sad. I mean, this scene is so well done. When, like, then you have this shot of Jack Sparrow, and he's looking at Elizabeth losing the love of her life after they just got married, and you just see the look of distraught on Jack's face. It's so good. I mean, this scene is so well done. It's magnificent. It's seriously magnificent. But Jack looks and he sees the Dutchman crew is beginning to come out of the ship. The Dutchman crew starts literally coming out of the woodworks, and they're all chanting, part of the crew, part of the ship. The bosun is carrying the chest. Bootstrap has the knife in his hands, and they're all going toward Will, who of course is going to be the new captain of the Dutchman. And Jack sees this, and he literally has to pull Elizabeth away from Will, and Elizabeth literally crying her eyes out, don't leave me. And then Jack literally pulls her away, and she's like, no, I won't leave you. And oh my God, it's so good. And Jack begins to make their escape. Bootstrap kneels down in front of his son with the knife in his hand, and Jack grabs a musket, and we go back over to Bootstrap, and Bootstrap just says, the Dutchman must have a captain. And then we have one last shot of Will right before Bootstrap implants the knife into Will. Then we see Jack and Elizabeth escape the Dutchman. Jack uses that musket, blows the ropes, and they begin to fly away on pretty much a parachute. Jack the monkey, thankfully, jumps onto the ropes before it leaves the Dutchman, and the Dutchman begins to sink into the Maelstrom. And so as Jack and Elizabeth fly away, they look down again and they see the Dutchman sinking into the Maelstrom, and then once it sinks, there's a big giant water splash, and Elizabeth just starts crying again and puts her head on Jack's chest as he steers the parachute away from the storm. And as you can see, once the Dutchman goes down, the storm clears away, and it's now clear skies again. And the parachute with Jack, Elizabeth, and Jack the monkey sinks into the water, and they're picked up by the Black Pearl as it crosses. So Gibbs helps Elizabeth and Jack on deck, and as soon as Jack gets on deck, he completely disregards everyone else. So Gibbs is, saying, thank goodness, Jack, the Armada's still out there, the Endeavour's coming up hard to starboard, and I think it's time we embrace that oldest and noblest of pirate traditions. And I love how Jack is not paying attention, and he just replies, never actually been one for tradition. And, Gibbs, Pinto, and Rigetti are all looking at him, and they're all confused. And Jack looks at the Armada in the distance, and he just says, close hauler, luff the sails and lay irons. And then Barbossa immediately says, belay that, or we'll be a sitting duck. And then Jack just says, belay that. And then I love how Gibbs is like, but the Armada, and then Jack just keeps saying, belay, no, shut it. And everyone just shuts up. And Gibbs goes and follows Jack to the helm of the Pearl. And everyone's confused, like, why is Jack acting like this? And this is one of those rare moments where Jack is completely serious. And I love it so much. So we see the Endeavour is now pulling forward from the Armada. Groves is looking at the Black Pearl through a spyglass, and he just says, what are they waiting for? And then Beckett just says, he expects us to honor our agreement. And then the Endeavour begins to ready their guns, which, of course, the Endeavour is way more powerful and way bigger than the Black Pearl. So they do not stand a chance against the Endeavour. And Beckett just says, it's nothing personal, Jack. It's just good business. And as the Endeavour begins to sail toward the Black Pearl, we have this great shot of the Pearl and the entire Armada. And then everyone looks to the side of the ship and they see the Flying Dutchman surface out of the water. Great music swell as well. And we see a lot of the cursed part of the ships it's starting to fall off. And it's starting to go back to kind of its pre-curse state. And Beckett sees the Dutchman and he says, she survived. And of course, Beckett has no clue that Davy Jones died. No clue that Will is now the captain. So he thinks that Davy Jones is still the captain, and therefore they're going to outpower the Black Pearl with the Dutchman and the Endeavour. So the Flying Dutchman begins to sail toward the Pearl as well. But then we get this great scene of the Flying Dutchman crew, and all of the sea life is falling off of them. And we get to see all of these crew members in their like original state. So we get to see Macus, of course, because he's holding the axe there, and we get to see all these crew members, and then we get to see Bootstrap pulling that starfish off of his face, and then everyone looks up, and then they see Will at the helm of the ship with the bandana on his forehead, and you can see that scar along where his heart should be, because his heart is now in the dead man's chest. And Will just says, "Ready on the guns." And then, of course, Elizabeth sees Will and she smiles. So does Jack, and Jack just says, "Full canvas." And then Barbossa repeats and says, "Aye, full canvas." So, of course, now that Will is here with the Dutchman and the Pearl, they can definitely destroy the Endeavour. So the Pearl and the Dutchman begin to turn on the Endeavour, and Beckett sees this, and he's like, "Wait a minute, why is the Dutchman turning against me? I thought they were on my side." And he's very confused as to why the Dutchman is siding with the Pearl. Of course, he has no clue Jones is dead. So, of course, the ship's near the Endeavour, and Groves just says, "Orders, sir." And Beckett just stands there completely in shock, not knowing what to do. And then Gibbs just asks Jack, he's like, "Captain." And then Jack just says, "Fire." And then Will shouts, "Fire!" And then Barbossa shouts, "Fire!" And then Elizabeth shouts, "Fire all!" Of course, she also said "Fire all" in the first movie as well. I don't know if that was a connection or anything, but of course, the Dutchman and the Pearl begin to fire on the Endeavour, destroying it so easily. And I love how there's a lot of people who are wonder, well, why doesn't Beckett shoot back? Beckett could easily take both ships. Why doesn't he shoot back? And I think it's the fact that he was so shocked to see the Dutchman turn on him, because he of course had no clue Davy Jones died, no clue that the Dutchman now has a new captain. So he was completely shocked to see the Dutchman turn on him and both those ships, and he was just completely shocked. He couldn't move. And that's why, he doesn't order the men to fire. So Groves repeatedly asked, "Orders, orders, sir." And Beckett just stands there looking at the carnage befalling the Endeavour. And this scene was also shot practically as well, which is pretty cool. So what they did for this scene is they shot this on a soundstage, at least the deck of the Endeavour. And they did it multiple times. So the first time they did it with just the stunt guys and Tom Hollander, who played Beckett, on the deck. The stunt guys would jump around and do their thing, and then Tom Hollander would walk down the stairs as Beckett, and then they would do it again with no one there, and then they would do it with all of the explosions and everything. So they had air mortars, they had all these explosions rigged, and then of course they only got one take at this, and they completely blew up the set of the Endeavour. And when they stitched that together with the one with the people on it, they put them on there, and then it really has this great scene of the Endeavour getting destroyed. So it's very, very cool. I love this scene so much. It's just of course the score by Hans Zimmer as well, amazing. And I love how everyone's just asking, "Sir, what do you command?" And Beckett just stands there and he just says, "It's just good business." And I love how Groves at this point knows that Beckett is completely not going to do anything. So Groves gives the orders to abandon ship. So everyone begins to abandon ship. Groves jumps overboard, saving himself. Of course, we will see Groves in On Stranger Tides, because he does survive this. But Beckett just looks at the Endeavour getting destroyed. I just love the slow-mo explosions, the people getting blown away. It's It's so beautiful, but also so destructive. And I love how that cannon implants the mast. And if you remember from earlier in the movie, Jack shot the mast and the mast went down. And so at this point, the mast is very fragile. So when it hits that mast, the temporary brace they put on it breaks and the mast falls over again. And of course, at this point, the Endeavour is not going anywhere. And Beckett begins to walk toward the staircase and steps down the stairs. And then we get the great slow motion death scene of Cutler Beckett as he walks down the stairs. And I just love how he walks down the stairs and the railing gets destroyed behind him as he walks. It's absolutely fantastic. Slow motion, the effects. It's, oh my god, so good. And then we have that shot of Beckett pretty much just standing in all of the debris. And then he looks at the camera and then wave of fire rushes over him and the Endeavour explodes and begins to sink beneath the waves. And then we have a great shot of Beckett's corpse falling into the East India Trading Company flag, which I love that shot. But now Cutler Beckett has died as well. So both of our villains, Davy Jones and Cutler Beckett, are both dead, which means it's over. We've won. So since the Endeavour went down, the rest of the Armada was like, well, I'm getting out of here. And they turned away. And Marty sees this and he says, they're turning away. And then everyone begins to cheer. All the pirates on the Pearl begin to cheer. And then guess who we see? We get to see Murtaugh and Mulroy again. So, of course, they got onto the Black Pearl at the end of the Maelstrom, and they emerge on deck in pirate gear. So now Murtaugh and Mulroy are pirates. And I love how they begin to cheer with everyone else. And they're really awkward. And Jack is smiling, Gibbs is smiling, everyone's smiling. Cotton's parrot comes back, and he says, "What? Wind in your sails." But everyone's happy. It's over. The pirates have won. It's great. And I love how Murtaugh and Mulroy are just so awkwardly like, shiver me timbers. And I love how Pinto and Rigetti are just looking at them. And they're like, what the? And then they're like, oh, well. And then they all start cheering as well. And then we get this great montage of all the other pirate ships cheering. So we go over and see the Empress and Tai Huang. They're cheering. Sri Chumbaji's ship, they're cheering over there. We see Amon the Corsair, and they're all Amon's dancing, and Cheval and Villanueva. And we see Gentleman Joe Card and Mistress Ching. They're all cheering. And then we get to see Captain Teague and his crew and his ship. And they all begin to throw their hats in the air. And great to see Captain Teague one last time in this film. And Jack just says to Gibbs, "Mr. Gibbs, you may throw my hat if you like." And I love how Gibbs like, "Aye, aye, Captain." And he says, "Hooray!" And he throws the hat. And then Jack just says, "Now go and get it." And then Gibbs is like, "Oh." And he begins to run down to the deck to find the hat. Then we get this great shot of the Pearl and the Dutchman sailing. And then we get this great scene of Will and his father. So Will, of course, is looking over at the Black Pearl, obviously looking at Elizabeth. And Bootstrap comes over to Will and he says, "Orders, sir." And then Will looks at his father and he smiles at him and he just says, "You're no longer bound to the Dutchman. You're free." And then Bootstrap just says, "Aye, that's a fine thing, but by my reckoning, I still have a debt that has to be paid, if you'll have me." And then Will just smiles at his dad, and Will just says, "On the wheel then, Mr. Turner." And then Bootstrap just says, "Aye, Captain Turner." So good. Will goes back to looking over at Elizabeth on the Pearl, and Bootstrap sees him looking over, and Bootstrap then tells Will, "This ship has a purpose again, and where we are bound, she cannot come. 1 day ashore, 10 years at sea. It's a steep price for what's been done." And then Will just tells his father, "Depends on the 1 day." Then we go over to Elizabeth on the Pearl, and then we have this emotional scene, like way too emotional for its own right. But Gibbs comes up to Elizabeth and he says, "Your chariot awaits, Your Highness." Of course, he points to the longboat getting ready to be dropped into the ocean. And then he just says, "The oars are inside." But then, of course, we have this great music going on in the background as Elizabeth says goodbye to everyone on deck. So she first stops at Barbossa. And what does Barbossa say to her? Barbossa says, "Mrs. Turner." And Elizabeth just smiles at him. And it's the callback of, if you remember in the first movie, when, Barbossa and Elizabeth meet for the first time, and Barbossa says, "You have a name, Missy." And then Elizabeth just says, "Elizabeth Turner." And now Barbossa calls her Miss Turner again, and she actually is Mrs. Turner. Like, oh my God, it's too good. It's too good. Oh my God. But she smiles at Barbossa. And then, of course, Pintel and Rigetti. Pintel says, "Goodbye, Poppet." And then Murtagh and Mulroy, of course, they remember her too. And Marty. And then she reaches Jack. And then she just says, "Jack, it would have never have worked out between us." And then Jack just smiles at her and says, "Keep telling yourself that, darling." And then Elizabeth goes to kiss Jack, but Jack stops her and he's like, "Once is quite enough." And then she just says, "Thank you." And then she goes into the boat. And now we have the second greatest part of the Caribbean scene, which is the beach scene. So we go over to the beach and we see Will and Elizabeth's swords crossed in the sand. And then we get to see the end of the one day that Will and Elizabeth got to spend together before Will goes away. And Will is putting his boots back on, and he just says, "I'm going to need the other one." And then on the left side of the screen, Elizabeth steps onto that rock with Will's boot on. And here we get literally the most mature thing to ever be in any Disney movie ever. I mean, Will slowly pulls the boot off, and then it oh my God. And then he goes close to Elizabeth's leg and this isn't a Disney movie, by the way. Oh my God. But it's so beautiful as well. But Will just looks away and he just says, "It's nearly sunset." And Elizabeth opens her eyes from the bliss, and of course notices the sun is setting. And Will goes over to grab his coat, which reveals the chest under it. And he grabs the chest, and you can hear the heartbeat as this scene is going on as well, which is such a great touch. But Will just says, "It's always belonged to you." And then he picks it up, and he offers it to Elizabeth. And he says, "Will you keep it safe?" And there's something so romantic about a guy literally giving his heart to you. I mean, literally giving his actual beating heart to the woman that he loves. No one's doing it like Will Turner, dude. But Elizabeth, of course, just says yes. And she walks over to Will and takes the chest and says yes. And then, of course, we have the great forehead touch. And I don't know why Will would do this. Will literally turns away and begins to leave without even kissing Elizabeth. And Elizabeth sets the chest down and she just says, "Will," and she runs over to him, and we get that last Willibeth kiss with the music, the gorgeous, gorgeous music playing in the background, the absolutely gorgeous landscape and the sunset. And then as they part, Will just says, "Keep a weather eye on the horizon." Which, of course, if you remember, Will also said that in Dead Man's Chest. When they had that scene when Elizabeth was in jail, and Will went to leave and he said, "Keep a weather eye on the horizon." Oh my god. It's too much. But then Will turns to leave, and then we get this great shot of the Flying Dutchman sailing over the horizon, and we see the green flash, and the Flying Dutchman disappears, leaving Elizabeth alone for 10 years. But not really alone, because she's going to have a son named Henry, and we'll see that very soon. But we get to back to Tortuga, and we see the return of Giselle and Scarlet with Jack Sparrow here. And I love how he's describing the Black Pearl to them, and he's like, and of course it tends to list the port and is often known to frighten young women. But I promise you, you will not be disappointed. And then Giselle looks at it, like, is that it? And then Scarlet's like, the Black Pearl. And then you just see the dinghy just sitting in front of the dock. And then Jack just says, love, that is a dinghy. My vessel is magnificent and fierce and huge-ish and gone. Why is it gone? And then Giselle's like, is that it there? And then Jack sees it in the distance sailing away, and Jack's like, yes, there it is. Why is it there? It's much larger up close. And then I love how Giselle and Scar are like, Jack, you promised to take us for a ride. And then Giselle's like, I was to be given the first ride. And then Scarlett's like, what, you? And I love how they start arguing as Jack walks over to Gibbs, who is asleep with the teddy bear. This is great. But I love how we have Jack waking Gibbs up, and we just have Giselle and Scarlett arguing in the background. But Jack pours his rum on Gibbs's face, waking him up. And then Jack's like, Mr. Gibbs, any particular reason why my ship is gone? And then Gibbs is like, the ship? We're on the ship. And then Jack's like all confused. And then Gibbs really wakes up and he's like, Jack, the ship's gone. And then Jack's like, really? And then, of course, Giselle and Scarlett are still fighting. And then Jack walks over to him and he's like, ladies, will you please shut it? Then I love this line from Jack. He's like, listen to me. Yes, I lied to you. No, I don't love you. Of course it makes you look fat. I've never been to Brussels. It is pronounced egregious. And by the way, no, I've never actually met Pizarro, but I love his pies. And all this pales into utter significance in light of the fact that my ship is once again gone. Savvy? I love it. After he says that, Giselle slaps Jack, then Scarlett slaps Jack, and then Jack goes and slaps Gibbs. And Giselle and Scarlett begin to walk away, and then Gibbs and Jack just have that moment, and Gibbs says, take what you can. And then Jack says, give nothing back. And they do that fist bump. And Gibbs goes after Giselle and Scarlett, and he's like, tell me, ladies, what do you know of sea turtles? Great conversation starter by Josh Me Gibbs there. But of course, Jack is looking out at the Black Pearl, which is sailing away. Once again, Jack has lost a pearl. And Barbossa is now the captain of the Black Pearl once again. I love how we see Barbossa having this really tender moment with Jack the Monkey. It's so sweet. With the peanut callback as well. And I love how he's like, ooh, that's a good boy. You're daddy's boy. it's so good. And Pintel, Rigetti, Marty, Murtaugh, and Mulroy come up to Barbossa. And then Pintel says, Captain, some of the men don't feel entirely settled, leaving Captain Jack behind. And then I love how Rigetti butts in, again. And then Pintel's like, again. And then Barbossa's like, is that so? And then Pintel's like, it would make us feel a whole lot better regarding our fortunes if you let us see that item you told us about. And then Marty says, on the charts. And then Pintel says, with our own eyes. And then Rigetti's like, to help put an ease to our burden of guilt, so to speak. And I love how you can see Rigetti is carving a new wooden eye, which is really cool. And then Barbossa's like, feast your eyes upon this, mateys. There be more than one way to live forever. Gents, I give you the fountain of youth. And he rolls out the charts, and everyone is like, wait. And Barbossa looks down, and he sees the charts have been cut out. And who could have done it? But Barbossa just says, Sparrow. And then we go over to the little dinghy that Jack has now, and Jack raises his flag, which of course has the skull and crossbones with the bandana and the little bird on it. And he is also singing Yo Ho, A Pirate's Life for Me. Of course, the song from the theme park ride written by Exitencio. And we get this great final scene of the movie with Jack. He sits down and he pulls out the charts. Of course, because he stole it. And he turns the charts and sees the Fountain of Youth, Florida, and Aqua de Vida. And he also sees on there Ponce de Leon and the Santiago 1523. And of course, that sets up on Stranger Tides. But the funny thing is, there wasn't actually supposed to even be a fourth Pirates movie, because this was, of course, the last one that Gore Verbinski directed. This was the end of the trilogy Gore Verbinski had in mind. And he just had that to kind of set up, the next adventure, but he didn't want to do another Pirates movie. That's why, Rob Marshall came and directed On Stranger Tides. But this was supposed to be the end of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. And I think it's a really great ending. Of course, nothing beats the ending for Dead Men Tell No Tales, and we'll get to that, and why that's such a good ending when we cover that movie. But Jack goes and opens his compass, and he sees it, of course, is now working again, and it points to the rum behind him. He pops off the cork, and he just says, "Drink up, me hearties, yo-ho." And he drinks the rum, and then we have that great swell of the Pirates of the Caribbean theme, as we have that great shot of Jack in the dinghy as the sun begins to set. And then the screen cuts to black, and we have the credits begin to roll with that fantastic He's a Pirate theme, directed by Gore Verbinski, written by Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio. And that is the end of At World's End. Of course, we still have the end credit scene, which we'll get to in just a second, but as the credits are rolling, of course, I mean, it still astounds me that this movie came out so great, especially with when they were even filming, Dead Man's Chest and At World's End, they didn't even have the ending of At World's End in mind. So the fact that it came out so great and so amazing, it's fantastic. And as I said, this is my favorite Pirates of the Caribbean movie. And it's so good. There's so much stuff going on. Of course, a lot of people say, it's a boring movie. It's too long. There's too many people talking. And yes, that is very true. It's the longest Pirates movie. It's a lot of dialogue. It's a lot of story. The story is pretty complicated, but if you really, if you take a second, you step back and you look at, you just watch the movie, and you listen to what the characters are saying, and you think about it. It's not that complicated, and it's really, if you do that, you can really understand how fantastic this movie is. So yeah, it's such a good movie. I'm so happy. Of course, we finally gotten through it, and yeah, we of course now have one last scene to cover in this film. Of course, as the credits roll, we have the great theme there, and then we have the Hoist the Color Suite, which is one of my personal favorite Pirates of the Caribbean tracks, which is also what I've ended the At World's End episodes with. If you listen all the way to the end of the episode, I have the Hoist the Color Suite at the end. But now we have one last scene, which, I mean, literally, this end credit scene puts every single Marvel credit scene to shame. This is literally the best end credit scene in any movie, and I'm not going to debate that with anyone. But we get to the end of the credits, and we get this great shot of this island, and we see 10 years later. And we see this little boy on screen here, and of course it says 10 years later. So he's also singing Yo Ho, a Pirate's Life for Me. And then we see Elizabeth come on screen, and oh my god. Ugh. And of course, at this point, 10 years later, we now have Will Turner and Elizabeth's son, Henry Turner, who of course we see in Dead Men Tell No Tales. But oh my god, this scene is so beautiful, man. And a lot of people are wondering, like, where is this? Where are they? They're actually on Jamaica. They're back on Jamaica. And a lot of people were also, wondering, where Elizabeth lives, especially in Dead Men Tell No Tales with the ending of that movie. That is also Jamaica. A lot of people were thinking it was Shipwreck Cove, but it's not. It's actually Jamaica. It's just the other side. They're not at Port Royal. But I just, oh my god, this scene. I love Elizabeth's outfit. I talked about this on my personal Twitter account. I've been in love with this Elizabeth outfit for literally the entirety of this movie's been out for literally 16 years. Like the puffy sleeves, the green vest, it's too good. It's so good. But Elizabeth catches up with her son. And of course, they are waiting for Will to come back after his 10 years at sea. And Elizabeth just pulls Henry close to her, and we have the great music by Hans Zimmer coming back. And we see the sun gets ready to set, and then we just see the green flash reflected on Elizabeth's face, and she begins to smile. And she looks down at Henry. Henry looks up and smiles at her. And then we see Will Turner on the Flying Dutchman, and he sees both of them up there, and he smiles. And then we see that great last shot of the Dutchman coming toward the shore for Will to see his family again. And that is the end of At World's End. And of course, that is the first time that Will gets to see his son. So it's pretty crazy, but yeah, I mean, it's fantastic, and I love this movie so much. But anyway, we've hit an hour and a half, so this episode didn't end up being as long as I thought it was gonna be, which I guess is good for everyone else, because I don't think anyone else would listen to a 2-hour episode. But yeah, that'll do it for At World's End, and that'll do it for season 1 of Podcasts of the Caribbean. As I said a few episodes ago, my plan for the podcast at the beginning was to cover the first 3 movies, and then we would branch out and do other things before we hit the next 2 movies. So of course we will be covering On Stranger Tides and Dead Men Tell No Tales. Do not worry, we just won't be covering them next. So I will be taking a week or so break. I'll keep, if you follow the Twitter account and Instagram account for the podcast, you can keep up there, and I'll let you know when the podcast is coming back. But we're going to be diving into some expanded materials. So the next episode that we will be doing, the first episode of season 2, is going to be about the Pirates of the Caribbean theme park ride. How it was made, when it was made, what's inside the ride, the story of the ride, and how it was brought to life, the people that made it, and how it, really became such a pop culture sensation that eventually led to these movies being made. So that is, of course, the first episode of season 2 that'll be coming in a few weeks. Very, very excited for you guys to listen to that. If you aren't really a Disney parks or Disney fan, I hope you learn a lot of stuff on that episode. It's going to be a really fun one. And after that, we'll be diving into, some books, some comics, some other expanded stuff outside the movies. And then, of course, we'll jump back around to On Stranger Tides and Dead Men Tell No Tales. So I hope you're excited for season 2 of the podcast. Hope you're excited to learn about the original theme park ride that opened in 1967. And until then, that'll be the end of this episode. So I thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast so far, if you've enjoyed this episode, I thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. I thank you so much for listening. It means the world to me that people are actually listening to me ramble about my favorite thing in the world. So I thank you so much for listening. If you have enjoyed, please consider leaving a rating or a review on whatever platform you're listening on. And I'll see you back here in season 2 of Podcast of the Caribbean. Podcast of the Caribbean is in no way affiliated with Disney. If you want to send me an email or question, send it over to podcastofthecaribbean@gmail.com. You can also follow this podcast on Twitter at podcastpotc and over on Instagram at Podcast of the Caribbean. I post some fun content, some trivia videos over there. Make sure you go and give those platforms a follow. And be sure to keep a weather eye on the horizon. And always remember, dead men tell no tales. And I'll see you in season 2 of Podcast of the Caribbean.